Hello, welcome to The Route to Success, where we explore the science of hope, resilience, and practical leadership through real stories from people who have built impact over time. Today's guest is David Bakelman, a seasoned nonprofit executive with more than 25 years of experience leading regional, national, and global organizations. David is known for stepping into complex nonprofit environments, strengthening brands, diversifying revenue, two of my favorite things, guiding organizations through change. His career spans health-related nonprofits, youth homelessness, and large-scale funding systems. In this conversation, we talk about leadership resilience, hiring well, navigating career transitions without guilt, embracing technology and AI in fundraising, and how staying anchored in core values can carry you through uncertainty. This episode is packed with lessons that you can use right now, whether you are early in your career or leading at scale. David, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you and your viewers, so thank you again.
Oh, of course, of course. So I'm going to just dive right in because I have so many questions for you, so much I want to learn about. You've led nonprofits at regional, national, and global level, often stepping into organizations during periods of transition. When you enter a new leadership role, what are the first things you assess to understand whether an organization is set up for long-term success?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And consistently, it's really, even before I enter the organization, but when I accept an offer to go in, I really look at the infrastructure. Can the infrastructure support not just current status quo, but more importantly, to have the vision of the staff and the board to grow the organization? So when I say infrastructure, I talk about processes, I talk about appropriate staff with a skill set. I talk about building a high-performing board. I also look at technology, which is a really important factor, even in the nonprofit side of things, is do you have the technology to support the growth going forward? So those are the few of the attributes and processes that I look at even before I start the job. So it gives me a good understanding and gives the team a good understanding. We're going to set some really aggressive goals, but I promise you that we'll build the infrastructure in the first 6 months to a year to really support the aggressive growth. And when I say aggressive growth, I don't only mean in revenue, but I mean in staff to meet the mission. I mean in program growth is looking out 2 or 3 years to see where are the gaps in potential services in a mission-driven organization, and how do we work towards creating and implementing new programs that are really going to fit the needs of the constituents and the population that we're serving with that nonprofit.
David, I agree with you so much. And this is something I'm working on with 3 organizations myself right now. So let me say it the way that I always say it so you hear it 2 different ways. A nonprofit cannot grow without a strong foundation. And there is never anything wrong with pausing for a minute to review that infrastructure. David calls it infrastructure. I call it foundation because I always think of building a house. I'm very visual, right? And pausing, reviewing that, making sure it is up to speed to where you want to go, tweaking it, adjusting it, getting everything 100% ready to go, and then launching. Because David, I think you would agree, without those foundational documents, that infrastructure, growth just isn't going to happen, is it? Or it will happen, but it'll be messy or weak.
I agree. And not just in my case throughout my career, but when a new, whether it's a senior leader or executive director, president, CEO, whatever, goes into the organization, the board and the community and the staff expects change and positive change. So you really can't go in with status quo. So I agree with whether it's the term foundation or infrastructure. There's expectation of that new leader going in that they're going to drive growth on every level. And the question is, do you have the experience and the vision to look ahead of how you're going to map out that growth? And I think that's a key for any leader, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, going into a new environment. I always say, if you're a good salesperson working for Coca-Cola, you can take that skill set and go to IBM and be really successful because you're using that vision, you're being intuitive, and you know how to build out that roadmap. And again, it's the same way in the nonprofit environment of just kind of pushing growth forward. But again, sorry to be repetitive, but when you're going in as a leader, there's an expectation on you for growth. They don't want status quo. And I think that's whether you're a seasoned veteran in the nonprofits or somebody coming out of undergraduate or graduate school, you're going in there to push the organization forward. And I think that's really an important reminder to remind yourself that, you're going in with fresh ideas to push forward.
And David, let me just stress you were not repetitive in the least. Everything you said has so much value. I just wanted to make sure because you started so strong, I wanted to make sure everybody really listened to that first response because that honestly, in my experience with the number of nonprofits I've gone into as a leader, what you're saying is exactly what has to happen. And you've got to have that competence to do that. Okay, let's talk about hiring, especially in the current world. So you said early in your career, you were told that hiring is the most important part of a leader's job. How has this advice shaped the way you build teams, and what should leaders look for beyond resumes and credentials when hiring?
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. Again, when I ran the United Way campaign in Atlanta, which was the fourth largest campaign, and
Yeah.
I was like 30 years old and I had a staff of 100 people, which, knew in my career, it wasn't intimidating, but I wish I knew what I know now when I was 30 years old and had a big staff. So, I learned really quickly, but my boss, who was a CEO, said, whether you stay in the United Way system or whether you go outside the United Way system, hiring is the most important part of your job. And I've taken that throughout my career in the last 20 years, whether, like I just alluded to, going into a new organization and assessing the staff and, do they have the skill set individually to move the organization forward? Number one. Number two, if not, do they need mentoring and coaching, even on the senior staff level, to push the
Mhm.
organization? Then over time, and it's always a tough thing, but if they don't have the skill set and you can't mentor and coach them because they're not receptive, you have to look at the situation of transitioning somebody out of the organization, which is not easy. I mean, it's,
Oh,
anybody
yeah.
that it's easy, I would say they're kind of crazy because you're dealing with somebody's life and it's emotionally tough on you.
Oh, yeah.
What I do is a couple of things regarding attributes as far as building out a team and a high performing team based on the advice I gave me that I was given, I should say, when I was 30 years old, is number one, do they have the skill set? Not just when I'm hiring new people, but also for the current team in place. I think that's really important. The second thing I look at is do they really believe in the mission? And you know what? Which sounds kind of weird because you would think anybody in the nonprofit, they believe in the mission of the organization. But I can't tell you how many times over the last 20 years, even in a down economy, I would get calls from people I knew and people I didn't know is how can I transition into the nonprofit? Meaning, especially like in real estate agents or even the corporate side, they're going through a downsizing or they're just totally burnt out. Uh, they'll call me up and say, how do I break in? And one of the things that I'm very transparent is like, you have to have a value system that is really important to help people. And everybody, whether it's for profit, nonprofit, will say, it's part of their value system to help people. But I would say it's one thing to talk the talk, but it's the other thing to walk the walk. And I think that's really important. And then again, we're building on a team, even if they're in a corporate environment and corporate space, you can look at their resumes and see if they have over the last, whether it's 3 years or 25 years, volunteerism and volunteer experiences. I think that shows that, uh, somebody has the internal value system that can help mold out the team. The other thing that I look for, and this might be one of your questions moving forward, but I always look at and you have to be careful legally with asking
Mhm.
questions, but I want to make sure also that they've always had a balance between their professional life and their family and personal life.
Mhm.
That's so
Mhm.
important to me. And getting back to when I had a staff of 100, my daughter, was just born, and I always kept, even though, I had to work long hours and it was very stressful raising $80 million a year, that I always had that balance between spending time with my family and work. And that is so important to me. And I always tell people, whether it's coming on boards that of organizations I'm running or interviewing staff people, is that it's always been important to me of my value system to have the balance between my personal and family life and my work life. And the last probably 3 or 4 jobs, even when I'm interviewing, whether it's with a search committee or when I finally meet the board, I mean, the staff, that's one of the things I really emphasize, because there's an unknown of a new leader coming in the organization, but I try to set the tone early, stating it's always been important to me in my career to have that balance. And
Mhm.
I use the word expectation, which is a really strong word, but I have that expectation of our team that you'll have that balance. When I see you, stressed out or working too much and not taking time off, I'm going to challenge you to say, hey, you have your PTOs, you're not using them. It's good for everybody's mental health to go ahead and take time off. So again, that's some of the things I look at regarding,
Mhm.
hiring, how important it is. But out of your top 3 or 4, you know, attributes or skill sets with building a team or pushing an organization forward, it's surrounding yourself with people. And it's a kind of funny uh, adage, but I always try to find, and this is, I'm pausing before I say this, but I always try to find people that are either as strong or stronger than me. And once we build a strategic plan with the board and the organization, and we have our metrics and measures, I just stay the hell out of everybody's way. And we meet as a management team once a week. And, it's really easy to really celebrate successes and talk about successes, but I'd rather talk about stress points or where we're not meeting our goals and really brainstorm as a team. So, I know that was a little long winded, but I think that's what I look at when I'm hiring people. But also, is once
Right.
you give them, the strategic plan, step in when they need mentoring and coaching, but stay out of their way. And if you did a great job in hiring, the team's going to propel itself forward
Right.
and most of the goals by the end of the annual fiscal year or the 3-year strategic plan.
You said so many things there that I just want to highlight. I want to make sure people heard. So first and foremost, something that I really worked on in the last couple of positions that served as a CEO and now as I'm a business owner, I really stress that PTO because I read this really scary fact, and I'm not going to be able to stress it or get it exact, but it was frightening enough that it stuck with me for years. That as Americans, we don't use our PTO, and we look at not using our PTO as some kind of way to show our strength and award. And in all reality, that is the worst thing you can do. And so some of the things I did when I was a CEO is I, f- I would quietly force people to take off, meaning when it had been a couple months and we didn't have a long weekend, I would say, you know what, we're taking Friday off as an organization. I want you at home resting. Or when I ran to summer camp, I would give my staff the week off before camp and the week off after camp. And I'd be like, don't come into the office. I know the office looks a mess. I get it. We'll clean it up the week after, but I need you home. So sometimes you have to creatively push that PTO. But I think too is how you set that example. The second thing you said that is so, so powerful that as a mentor and coach, I touch on a bazillion times is that and this is me saying in my words what you said, you you set your staff up for success. You make sure they have their boundaries, they know their parameters, and they know the goals that they're responsible for. You make sure they know exactly how those metrics and measurements are going to be implemented. You have that conversation. You make sure there's 100% understanding. And then you check in weekly and you focus on the pain points, which I know sounds potentially to be negative, but it's not, because what you're doing is you're creating a safe place to say, hey, what is something you're struggling on? Because you've got all these other people here that have different perspectives and we can all jump in and help you. And you are creating such a healthy environment to thrive in. And so I just really, really wanted to stress those 2 points that you made, because everything that you've said have been golden nuggets, but those are 2 points to just absolutely stress, David.
Yeah, we're aligned totally on all of our subjects, but when you look at other countries and they have more aggressive family leave time, or they have
Mhm.
when a couple have a baby and the husband can take off 6 weeks for whether it's short-term disability or whatever it's called. When we look internally, meaning at the workforce in the United States, and like you said, when people take time off, a lot of times they're afraid to take time off, or it's looked at as a negative. But what you just said, I agree with 100%. It helps everybody's mental health, and it keeps that balance, which we both alluded to, between personal
Right.
work life. And I think that's, you know, whenever I've interviewed for jobs, or, I interview if I'm on a search committee, somebody will always say, what's the culture of the organization? And so many times I think the word culture is interpreted the wrong way of what's
Mhm.
really important. And again, I can say this 100 times, that balance between personal and work, like you said, and we both said, the ability to take risk and focus on stress points, those are really positive points of a healthy culture in an organization where, early in my career, one of my bosses was really intimidating. So all of our entire team was hesitant, or even, I'm going to use the word afraid, to go and talk to that manager about where we're not going to hit our goals because of the implications and everything. But, and I know cultures have changed over time, but I think it's really important where, whether it's a management team most of the time, or or even mid-level managers, can discuss where they're not going to hit their goals, and so everybody as a whole can take corrective action. I can't in two of the organizations, I had the same CFO I recruited when I left, my CFO, and she was a numbers person, very rigid. But when we had our weekly management team meetings and we were discussing, where we're not going to hit our goals or just other things, she would come up with the best ideas out of the group, even if it was regarding programs. And a lot of times people look at as a CFO at a CFO or director of finance, well, it's a different skill set. This person is just a numbers person. But I think that's where it comes to building a cohesive team, is having different skill sets that can come together and really brainstorm. And knowing that a CEO, a president, executive director, is a person making the ultimate decision. But often, probably throughout the last 20 years, 85% of the time I made decisions, it was based on a team's approach.
Mhm.
And the 15% was probably where, if I'll weigh the management team, it was probably because I had metrics to support it, or I had experience of going through that scenario where I was successful. But I would never, you know, I'm going to use the word demean, and that's not the right word, but I would always take the feedback as very conducive to moving the nonprofit forward.
Agreed. Agreed. So this is something that I have very strong feelings about, and I'm really excited for this conversation. You've spoken openly about changing CEO roles every few years as part of your professional path. How do you think leaders can reframe job changes as impact driven decisions rather than personal or professional failure? And I would also love for you to touch on the danger of complacency and getting comfortable.
This conversation could last 2 hours.
Right? I know. I'm so sorry. You've been so much fun.
No, it's like, that's just part of my mindset, is really, number one, setting aggressive goals and assertive
Right.
goals. And when I was running the United Way campaign, I was in a meeting with probably 15 to 20 of the top Fortune 100 CEOs of America that were running or in leadership positions within the United Way. And I still think about it on at least a weekly basis. The CEO of Anheuser-Busch, I don't remember his name, made a comment at the end of his presentation, and it was, would you rather reach for the stars and miss, or aim for the gutter and hit? And I always pause and think about that, and that's just my mindset. I'm very competitive, and I'd rather set aggressive goals, which are really going to broaden the scope of the mission and the programs of the organization, and miss those, right? But still raise
Mhm.
more money, or have more of a program impact by setting goals. And I'm circling back to the first part of question. And, that's why in my career, it's not like 30 years ago where you would have a corporate career at, you know, Coca-Cola or a Home Depot or just anywhere. Is like, I learned that loyalty on both sides of the spectrum 30 years ago really changed just through
Mhm.
numerous corporate downsizings. And I saw that at a United Way because we were working with all big corporations in Atlanta. So after that, I I'm a very I'm a confident person, but I try to be as humble as I can be in how I was brought up. But I'm really good at going in and making monumental changes and mushroom in the organization. Most of the organizations that I've gone into lead can never get over $1 million, or 3 million, or 5 million after 10 or 20 years. And the boards of these organizations, they don't want to be complacent and they get frustrated that the organization hasn't grown. So my mentality has been go in, like we were talking about a few minutes ago,
Mhm.
assess the situation, assess the staff, assess the processes, assess the technology, and then within probably, I always say 4 to 5 months, build out a strategic plan with metrics and goals with a strategic planning committee. So I look at with my own personal career, whether it's right or wrong, it usually takes me 3 to 3.5 years to really have 100 to 200% increases in everything. In board composition, I have a roadmap of what the board should look like in 3 years. On the service delivery system, the programs, if we're helping 1,000 people, we look at how do we, in within 3 years, double that or triple that. On the revenue side, I go in and assess the revenue buckets and where there's new growth from additional donors or corporations or foundations, or where more importantly is that growth from existing donors. So career wise, I've looked at it's going to take me 3 to 3.5 years, sometimes 4, to really make the impact that the board uh, that the board wants and the community expects, and then I move on, right? So I think, and just with also interviewing people and interviewing superstars, it's not uncommon for people to make career moves, even in the nonprofits, every probably 3 to 5 years. And,
Mhm.
I also learned, I don't know what meaning it is, but I always say to build or win an organization, I use the analogy of a sports team. If you look at whether it's a, NFL, Major League Baseball, any team, you have to have you're a mix of veterans and a mix of
Mhm.
rookies. And it's the job of that organizational leader to blend the culture where everybody fits together, meaning the veterans and rookies. So my point being, when people leave an organization, after, 3 or 4 years or 2 years or whatever, I never once in my life looked at it as a negative when
Right.
somebody, the organization, I always celebrate it. And, it's the old adage also in life, you don't burn any bridges. Because I can't
Mhm.
tell you how many people that I've hired back after they've left. Because it's like the grass is always greener on the other side, right? So they'll leave and the culture, excuse my language, sucks, or the benefit package sucks, right? And
Right.
they'll call me up and say, hey, can we have a cup of coffee? And they're like, can I ever come back? And I'm like, yeah, once we grow the organization for a new position. But I think that's a mindset of your viewers also, is that, yeah, you don't want to leave every year, but, to have that career advancement, number one, and, everybody thinks outside of the nonprofits, you're never going to make any money. But if you go to, whether it's a small organization on a senior management team or a bigger national organization, the compensation packages are quite well, and you can live a great life even as a single
Mhm.
person. But the mindset of, oh, I can't change jobs, I've only been there 3 years, and I can say this from interacting with peers all over the country, we don't look at it like that. If
Right.
somebody's jumping around every year, that's one thing. But if they're in career advancement positions and they're showing metrics on their resume of where they've made that impact on the mission or the area of responsibility, honestly, I look at it as a positive. I truly,
Mhm.
so, that's, you know, just my observation about me personally changing every 3 years, 3 or 4 years to go and lead another organization, but also people that I've hired or rehired, or people I meet at Rotary groups that want career advice. I'm like, you know what? There's nothing wrong with moving from organization to organization. Just make sure you can show your impact in your areas of responsibilities.
I agree 100%. And I will throw in my piece too. What I always remind myself, when you start to feel too comfortable or you become complacent at a job. And I think that, David, I might be very similar to you. I love challenge and I always need a certain amount of challenge in a career or I get bored. And so by moving every 3 to 4 years and to bigger situations or different problems, you're forcing yourself to grow. And I think you're so right. When you can show that impact, move forward.
Yeah, and I think it's also learning by your mistakes. And,
Yes.
I've touched on United Way a few times in Atlanta, but I was with United Way and I was fortunate that I get a promotion every 2 years. And the last position I was again running an $80 million campaign. And I stayed the final year because I wanted to work closely with the CEO of UPS. And I worked really closely with him. And that was when, you know, when the Twin Towers, were bombed and
Mhm.
everything. So the campaign went down the tubes like every other nonprofit and technology company throughout the world. But I look back and I say to myself, I knew I should have left a year before. And whether it's for the right reasons or wrong reasons, your word complacency was so appropriate. So when I get complacent and reach all the goals that I was brought in for, meaning over the
Mhm.
last 20 years, that's when I think about moving on for a new challenge. And uh,
Mhm.
and even the board, and staff, when I let them know that I'll be leaving, they're really not surprised because they look at from before I got there, and they could never go above a certain threshold in how I left the organization. Uh, they're quite pleased, but then it goes back, and again, I'm not saying I'm a superstar by any means, but it goes back to hiring the right person that's not going to come in and be complacent based on the foundation, using your word, that I built and the growth that I built. And honestly, in half the organizations over the last 20 years, and this is a subjective comment, but I feel they brought in the wrong person that doesn't have that assertive growth mindset,
Mhm.
and so they lose money every year from what was built, but they remain the same going forward. And maybe the board's complacent with it, but I would say most often than not, they're not complacent because that's why I was hired to come in.
Right. I agree. I agree. Let's talk about resilience. You mentioned that resilience is less about avoiding difficulty and more about adapting to change. When leaders face layoffs, cultural misalignment, or intense pressure, and we've kind of touched on all of this, what practical habits help them stay grounded and effective?
Well, and that's a great question because, throughout my career, I've been let go probably 2 times. And, like when people get let go, it's hard not to get depressed and down and everything.
Mhm.
But, when you're, whether it's a for profit or nonprofit, but I'm just going to focus on nonprofits, there's so many external environmental factors, number one. Number two, you're not just dealing with one boss, but you're talking about a board of directors. So I've led organizations that had a board that had 8 members. I've had boards that had 30 members. And the reality is, you piss off one board member who doesn't like you, right? Often
Right.
the effect, even if the majority of the board is aligned with you, meaning that CEO, but it still splinters the organization, right?
Right.
So I just, again, getting back to my first, response is that you're working with so many environmental factors. Even if you're the best thing since sliced bread, there's so many environmental factors, whether it's the economy, whether it's changing and letting staff members go that were aligned with board members because they were there for so long, whether it's, just making a wrong decision. And I'm getting back to, some of our conversation. I'm definitely a risk taker without a doubt,
Mhm.
right? But I don't take risks that if I fail on that risk, it's going to, cause the organization to fold. But I think getting back to one of my common themes during our conversation is taking risk and driving growth and everything. And you're always not going to win, right? But you have to realize that, it's a risk reward environment that I always put myself in. I go into very unstable, not unstable, but organizations that have plateaued, and go in and build energy and consensus and team building. But that doesn't always work out, right? So, that's one of the keys, I think, is that, the way you framed your question, I wouldn't look at failure as a personal defeat. It's like, what did I learn? And that's what always do. Even in, when I leave an organization and I, left it in 10 times better of an environment than when I went in there, I always assess, did I do everything I could have done? What mistakes did I make? And what would I do over to add to the organization, whether it's, focusing on an additional revenue stream, other revenue stream. But I just think you don't look at defeat as, an end all, or you don't look at, well, it didn't work out, I got let go, I had to let somebody go, as a defeat. I think, going back to the word, and I love this word, is resilience. But I will say, you know, the work that I do, I feel I'm really fortunate because I get to instill my value system in my daily work. And I'm in the business of saving lives. And I know that sounds corny, but most of the organizations I've run have been health related organizations, right? And there's definitely a cause and effect on raising more money. But the reality, and again, and this is going to sound like I'm minimizing everything, but it's just a job, right? And it goes back to family and balance and everything. And, everybody says this, like, when I look back in 30 years at the end of my career, do I want to say, oh, I wish I spent more time at work? No, everybody, whether it's, Steve Jobs, anybody else, is, it's great to have the material things if that's important to you, but it's about family and memories that make a difference. And I think that's one of the things to your viewers of, even if you get defeated or you don't hit your goals or you get let go, it's just a job. And there's so many, if you've proven results, there's so many opportunities out there, whether it's in your local community, in a specific geographical region, or nationally. So that's how I always look at it, is that when I leave it, and a couple of times I've had to leave my jobs because I was a primary caregiver for both of my parents at different times, and they had terminal illnesses. So I left my job 2 different times, and it was stressful financially, but I had a confidence in my ability that, on the level of jobs that I apply for, it's usually 3 to 4 months before I land something. But, I keep that value system of why I do what I do. And even if I was let go, that I can bounce back. So I think that's a big thing of resilience. I think, my last comment on that is, you don't look at, I look at resilience as a positive. I never look at it as, why wasn't I resilient, or this or that. And again, I always say, and I know I sound kind of philosophical, but life is so short, and make an impact while you can. And if crap doesn't work out as a place, you just bounce back and put your boots on and move forward, which is easier said than done. I get it, because everybody's situation is different. But I just, when you ask a question and you use a term, I've been very resilient throughout my life, and it's just, I think, the key to keeping a positive attitude, even when things are a little down or a lot down.
Mhm. I agree. I agree so much with you. And I think you do have to take those risks and gambles on yourself. And you do have to understand when it's time to move on. So I think brilliant, brilliant. So let's talk. And this is something I've really been excited to talk to you about, is technology and AI. And they're changing fundraising faster than many nonprofits are prepared for. How are you seeing AI used effectively today? And where do you think nonprofit leaders should start if they feel hesitant or overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's interesting. It's a really pertinent question now for some things that I'm working on. And like, there's a company called Wyland, and it's a for-profit company. They work with nonprofits with data analysis, but to see who your prospective donors are, to really look at lapsed donors and your current donors. But what has changed in the game of using companies like that is the ability to use AI and to be more accurate. And right now, because of technology and AI and data analysis, it's cheaper to use a company like Wyland or the other 50 companies that
Mhm.
are out there than to beef up your staff. Like
Right.
literally with pinpoint accuracy, they can give you like the data analysis in the nonprofit for fundraising has been out there for 30 years, right? But the way it's condensed to being a science is crazy right now. So for any director of development, chief advancement officer, CEO, whatever, I would encourage those people to really scope out and talk to some of these companies because you can raise money more efficiently, less on the dollar than you can with any other tool or staff member that's out there. And if I can spend, and I don't know how much it is, but let's say, a couple of thousand a month or 3,000 a month, 40,000 a year by using a company that can give me the data analysis using AI of my lapsed donors and who's my best prospect, but also my current donors of, not only where they're spending money, but there's other attributes, but also to build a, a really accurate donor pool who are
Mhm.
aligned with your mission and what their spending habits are, not just how much real estate they own. Like that's how I'm changing my mindset because you know what? I always put together a technology committee, one or two technology experts when I go into the organization because I have so many fish to fry. I just can't do everything. So I rely on subject matter experts over the last 20 years. But now what I'm looking at is that, you know, how do we invest with a company that can be so precise in raising money and and it's there's always competition for dollars fundraisers, that, I know that, everybody knows that, but when you can build an exact science behind it, the value proposition is something that I would encourage every nonprofit professional that it would be foolish not to look at this state of using technology. Like I said, I'm not technology proficient, but I'm smart enough to know that it's on the cutting edge, how I can raise more money more efficiently. And that's what I'm doing now.
I agree. I agree. I think too, one of the largest strengths of AI is gathering that research. And I mean even research outside of donors, like when you're writing a grant, research for that grant, analyzing that data, helping you break it down into layman's terms, playing devil's advocate, say I love to ask it, what did you understand from what I just said? It gives you the ability to really clarify what you're saying and use the tools you have to improve your everything within your organization, so to speak. I think about it, this is going to make you laugh. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. So I think about it as the way they use the computers in Star Trek, right? They don't ever use the computer to
Yeah.
do the job. They use the computer as a partner and a collaborator. And that's how I think of AI. And so I've even named mine just to make it fun, right? And it's like, hey, I'm doing research on this project. Can you pull this from this area? What does this mean? It's so invaluable that way.
Yeah, especially when you're a small, mid-sized nonprofit,
Yeah.
like, and resources are lean. And it's not like you're the Salvation Army or American Red Cross where you can spend millions of dollars on data research and everything. So if you're a small or mid-size, like under 10
Mhm.
million, I would encourage those leaders to really investigate it if they haven't already, because I think they'd be surprised, even if they're not technology savvy, of what these resources can do for your organization.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay, let's talk about mentoring, another one of my favorite topics. You've mentored leaders across generations and career stages. If you could give one piece of advice to emerging nonprofit leaders who want to grow key without burning out, what would you want them to hear?
Is from a career perspective, meaning a macro level, is to have patience and with developing their career. Because when I again was running the United Way campaign 20 plus years ago, most of my staff were under 30, right?
Mhm.
And some of them were 25, 26. And you're really impatient, right? Number one, because you want to develop your career. Number two, if you don't have a significant other, if you're living in a major city, it's really hard to pay your bills. and living solo and everything, and like career advice even 20 years ago. And it's what's weird is I still mentor and coach people who reported to me 25 years ago, or if they need career advice or if they need a reference for a new job, they'll contact me. And I look at as one of the biggest accomplishments of my life, of that I made that much of an impact on these young people that they're calling me 20 years later for career advice. But it sounds like I'm talking black and white a little bit, meaning that my whole theme during our conversation was assertive goal setting, be aggressive, but limit your mistakes. Don't be afraid of taking risks. But more from a global career longevity, it's be patient. Build your foundation when you're young. Always put metrics, even on the program side of things, on your resume, as again, serving on search committees. That's what separates a great resume from a mediocre one, is having metrics and having numbers and what they've accomplished. But having that patience, for somebody under 30, I think is really key. And one of my mentors who worked for Bell South, which was a huge communications company, uh, he said to me, David, just letting you know, and he was like 25 years older than me, and he said, the way to make your career move, or the time to make your career move, is when you're between 30 and 40. He said, when you're in 20 to 30s, you're building your foundation, to use your word again, and you're building, your resume and everything. But when you're going for like your huge career opportunities, it's when you're between 30 and 40. And I agree, not only for myself, but all of my peers. And I said that my daughter is 31. And I just said to her recently, you built your foundation. You have so much school and it's kind of crazy, but this is a time to turn it into action. So I think that's my advice for, not nonprofit, for profit, whatever, but make your career move in your 30 to 40s. Always have a mentor.
Mhm.
And I think is really important. And the biggest thing also is learn by your mistakes. As a manager, when I look back and I developed my management style, it was more so from managers that I said I'll never manage like them, versus
Mhm.
there were a few that did a great job. So it's so funny. I'm laughing when I say it. When I, again in my late 20s and 30s, and I was molding my management style, I would always think about how people manage me or how they manage other people. And I would say, I would never have that management style or that attribute. And that's what's molded me now. But I think that's key is, for your viewers, is really to observe different management styles and
Mhm.
internalize kind of a mesh of all these different styles, where you can be a charismatic leader, you can be consensus. And the other thing I'll say, all these scenarios are coming back to me, but when I was at the United Way again, we had somebody from IBM Consulting do some management training. And at the beginning of it, he made this statement that has always stuck to me, especially going into a new organization or when I serve on a board, is he said, and he said it in a group setting, people want to be led. And it's kind of true. I don't know if it sounds like egotistical if you internalize it to yourself, but
Mhm.
when I'm like, well, how are people going to, when I go into a new organization, how are people going to, take me when I first go in there? But
Right.
it's just being open, transparent, the balance between work and family is really important, but being very transparent and telling people what your management style, I think, is key. But knowing I was brought in to lead the organization.
Mhm.
So I can use all those attributes that I just mentioned, but knowing that somebody's going to lead the group. And, it's just been me throughout the years.
I think I agree with you so much. People do want to be led, not as in they want to be told what to do, but they want to understand the path. They want to understand the vision. They want to know someone is going to be pushing everything forward and their work is going towards something, you know?
Without, with, without a doubt. I just think also, as you just said, that people are inherently smart and they're inherently good and they're inherently motivated. But a lot of times people don't have the skill set that you might have, I might not have, or your viewers might not have as leaders. So a lot of people, you know, people have said to me, "Are you a leader or a follower?" And I say both.
Mhm.
And no, give me an answer. I'm like, I can't. I do both,
Right.
and I'm leading the organization, but I'm stuffing envelopes even in a multi-million-dollar organization to be part of the team. So, you're always going to have your followers, but you want them to lead in their specific roles. And I think it's incumbent on the manager to really get those skill sets to come out of an employee.
Mhm. I think one of the strongest attributes of a good leader is knowing when to step back and follow versus when to lead.
I agree, I could not agree with you. Is that when I failed as meeting specific goals is because there was one wink link in the
Mhm.
and I didn't address it, and that's
Mhm.
kind of my experience where I've learned from you know not doing it right. But and again, it's like nobody likes, even in a healthy situation. I'm going to use the word confrontation, or just saying where somebody's not hitting their goals or whatever, or even giving constructive criticism. But that's why you're being paid the money, and that's why you're in a leader position. Although it's hard, I still struggle. And over the last year I've had to let a couple of people go, and
Yeah.
it's sleepless nights and everything. But what kind of anchors me is that I was brought in here to move the organization forward, and I can't with this specific individual after a tremendous amount of assessment and mentoring and coaching, and then you have to do what you have to do. So it goes back to what I had mentioned about hiring is the most important part of your job, and then also surrounding yourself with very successful people and not being intimidated.
I agree. I agree. David, you have given so many nuggets today. I have a lot to think about, which is a really good thing. Thank you for that. And I really love everything that you've shared here. I would say whatever stage of leadership you are in, but be it you're working towards it, you're new, you're mid, you're senior, this conversation has nuggets and wisdom in it that you can use. Because maybe you do know that lesson, but what I have found as a leader, and I'm in my late 40s, right? So I've been a leader for a while. It's so good to get those reminders because it's like, you know what? I remember learning that and I've forgotten that. So you gave such good reminders, you gave such good tips, such good ways. And you kept bringing up having a mentor and coach. I have said repeatedly in different podcasts and different meetings, leadership is lonely. When you are at the top, you don't have necessarily, you can talk to your senior team, but you can't talk, right? So always have that mentor, always have that coach that you can go to and say, you know, here's what's going on. Here's what I feel. Here's what I've done. Can you help me get a clearer perspective? Because you need that. And you also need somebody to give you a push sometimes, I think.
I I agree. I was at My wife at the time and I were at dinner with a Atlanta CEO executive and his wife, and it's interesting you just said that. It was just a social dinner; it wasn't work. And she said it's lonely at the top, and she's like, once Jerry assumed this leadership position with thousands of employees, that he doesn't have any friends. Like it
Yeah.
changed. Interesting, and you're right. I could not agree with you more. Even for myself, what you just said, as far as even if you're at a leadership level, to have that mentor or coach, and to
Mhm.
really push back on you, or you to ask questions to, is so relevant. I That
Mhm.
was a genius what you just said, because I can internalize that myself, and it is so true.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will tell you, one of the things that I have really learned as a leader too is, and this will make you laugh, but the value of quiet in nature and of spending time in nature and taking my dogs for walks. Because while those are maybe solitary activities, they fill my cup, for lack of a better term, and help me get different perspectives that when I do sit down with my mentor, when I do sit down with my team, I'm ready. So I think it's that balance too.
It's funny, one last thing is that, like, in my car, most of the time I don't have the radio on, and people, if they're driving,
That.
even personally, will say, "Why don't you ever use put on your radio?" And I'm like, "It's my thinking time." It's the
Mhm.
only time I have where I'm pretty much by myself, where I can think, and it's so important to I'm not mental health, but to my thinking of where I want to bring the organization that I haven't thought of, to have that quiet time, like you walking your dogs and having that quiet time. And that's one of my biggest takeaways from our conversation today. No matter what level you're on, is having that quiet time, even away from your family. And I'm not saying go on a week vacation, but to take a walk, go do something. You can get everything together, even if you already have things together. So that was a great point that you just stated.
Oh, well, thank you. It's my brilliance of the day. You've witnessed it, David. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right. Well, thank you so much, David, for being here today. This is has been an absolutely great conversation. And I'm going to be completely honest. We had such a great conversation. I had to skip some of our questions. So if you ever want to come back and be a guest again, I would love to have some further in-depth conversations. So don't hesitate to reach out. And I always say this to every guest. If I can ever do anything to support, please know I am literally an email away.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me. And thank you to your guests.
All right. Thank you, David. We'll talk soon.
Bye.